But I think when someone is hesitant to get a vaccine, the most important thing to me is to validate their concern and then try to approach that validation or that concern with the facts.
From Diamond Pharmacy Services, this is PodcastRx, a monthly show that takes you behind the counter of the nation's largest correctional pharmacy provider. We bring you conversations with pharmacists, nurses, managers, and other Diamond staff about the topics and issues we see in corrections, long-term care, and community health settings. Our chats aren't limited to purely pharmacy topics, and they aren't strictly clinical either. So if you're a healthcare provider or just enjoy healthcare podcasts, we think you'll enjoy this show. On this episode, we welcome back Deborah Milito, PharmD, Director of Clinical and Consultant Services for Diamond's Long-Term Care Division, to revisit some frequently asked questions about the COVID-19 vaccines. You might remember our special bonus episode from February, featuring a vaccine town hall Q&A she gave for one of our nursing home clients. Dr. Milito goes over many of the questions from this first town hall, along with plenty of new ones. Why do another Q&A, you might ask? Well, with falling vaccination rates among the general population, and with, in Deborah's world at least, recent CMS rules requiring COVID vaccine education for long-term care residents and staff, it's important to reiterate the facts about these vaccines, to relieve any concerns, fears, or misunderstandings about them. And because vaccination is crucial to lifting us all completely out of pandemic life, we feel this is information well worth repeating. I'm Adam Campbell. Welcome to PodcastRx. I want to welcome Deborah Milito back to PodcastRx. You joined us a few months ago to talk about COVID vaccines. This was back in October of 2020. You shared your insights into the then ongoing Operation Warp Speed efforts to get vaccines approved and into the arms of the public. Then in January, you recorded a COVID vaccine town hall that sought to answer many frequently asked questions about the vaccines. You originally did this for a skilled nursing facility that Diamond serves, but your town hall presentation quickly became a resource for Diamond employees, and it was easily adapted into a special bonus episode of this very podcast. Now, back in January, the vaccine was set aside for healthcare workers and more vulnerable members of the community. And as we record this today, June 7th, 2021, the vaccine is available to everyone 12 years of age and older. The latest CDC stats as of June 6th showed that 41.9% of the total U.S. adult population is fully vaccinated, and that's about 139 million people, with 51.5% of the population receiving at least one dose. In early May, the Biden administration laid out a goal to have at least 70% of the population with at least one dose of the vaccine and 160 million adults fully vaccinated, all by July 4th. There were some articles today, however, in several publications like U.S. News & World Report and USA Today that noted how falling vaccine rates are threatening this goal. And of course, vaccine hesitancy, for whatever the reason, and there are many, plays a role here. So Deb, I want to start. You reached out to me and requested we record another vaccine Q&A, and I totally agreed. Absolutely, we need to do that. Am I correct in assuming that your request was in response to these falling vaccination rates and vaccine hesitancy in general?
Well, yes, somewhat, Adam, but also there's something called the interim final rule as it relates to infection control, and that's by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS. And up until a couple of weeks ago, under infection control were included influenza and pneumococcal vaccines, but recently they added COVID vaccinations. And so they're going to be having a bit of a comment period on this publication, but I think it's going to move quickly in that they will be surveying facilities for how they're educating the staff and the residents and the resident representatives about the COVID vaccine. And they're going to cover topics such as hesitancy, benefits, risks, and things like that.
Tying into that, since we last spoke, you and several colleagues, pharmacists and nurses here at Diamond, created the Strike Force Immunization Team. And your mission was to vaccinate residents and healthcare workers in skilled nursing and assisted living personal care homes here in Pennsylvania and also in Ohio. Did you encounter any vaccine hesitancy in these settings among workers, which is, you see a lot of press reports about healthcare workers being especially hesitant? And if so, how did you address concerns that people had?
Yes, we have seen the percentage of vaccinations for healthcare workers to be much less than what they are for the residents in the facilities. But I think when someone is hesitant to get a vaccine, the most important thing to me is to validate their concern and then try to approach that validation or that concern with the facts and try to stay away from the myths or the misinformation that you hear quite a lot about.
Absolutely. Having all the facts, you can't make an informed decision without the facts. So with that, I wanted to spend the rest of this episode just going over some frequently posed questions about COVID vaccines. These are questions that have been answered, in other places, but I think, as you said, it's very important to lay that out, especially when we have relationships with people at these facilities, to hear that from a trusted provider like us. This is a resource for anyone who still hasn't gotten that first dose, and it's an expanded edition of the Q&A that you gave back in January. So with that, Deborah, if I may, I'll just go right into the some of the background questions around COVID-19. I think it's helpful to just refresh what exactly COVID-19 is.
So COVID-19 is a disease that's caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It came to us back at the end of 2019, and then we took the year 2020 to have the development of the vaccines, which then became available at the end of December of 2020. And that was part of the Operation Warp Speed under the administration at that time. We're sort of getting away from that terminology with the new administration and just calling it the vaccine immunization plan for the United States.
What are the primary COVID-19 vaccines available, and how do they fight this disease?
So there are 3 vaccines that have emergency use authorization in the United States. The first 2, Pfizer and Moderna, are messenger RNA vaccines. The third vaccine is from Johnson & Johnson under the auspices of Janssen. Some people pronounce it Janssen vaccine, and that is called a viral vector vaccine.
How effective are these vaccines?
These vaccines can be up into the 90% range of effectiveness in preventing hospitalizations, the more severe COVID disease, and death. So they are very effective.
You mentioned the emergency use authorization. What is significant about that term in relation to the development of vaccines? So
medications and vaccines oftentimes get what's called an emergency use authorization, or EUA, before it's fully approved by the FDA. And that's a common practice for that to occur. It just seems like we're hearing a lot more about it right now because we're in the middle of a pandemic and we need that authorization as quickly as possible. And that's why it happened the way that it did. But I will tell you that both Pfizer and Moderna have applied for full authorization from the FDA.
Is there a general time frame on how that full authorization, when that will be complete or granted, rather?
I foresee that happening with Pfizer very soon, and Moderna maybe right after that, so within months.
One of the concerns that I've just generally heard in chit chat in the community is, these vaccines, they were developed and released so quickly. So are they absolutely safe? Because, normally vaccines take much longer to become so widely available.
So typically, it does take a very long time for a vaccine or medication to come to market. And the reason for that is a lot of money has to be raised to be able to do the research. And you have to get participants in the trials. So, there's the animal part of the study, and then there are the 3 phases of the clinical trials. And what happened with these vaccines, again, because of a pandemic situation, is that there were so many participants that wanted to be part of the study. So like for Pfizer, there were 44,000 participants. There were over 30,000 participants for the Moderna and the Janssen trials. The other thing that happened was that the 3 phases all went on at the same time, rather than waiting for the completion of phase 1, raise money, get participants, get into phase 2, so on and so forth. Typically, that takes years to do, but we were able to accomplish it because of the need for these vaccines to come to market quicker. And finally, the government paid $10 billion to the drug companies to not only research, manufacture, but to distribute the vaccines.
Can you talk a little more, Deb, about the specific mechanisms of the vaccines themselves? If you can give a quick answer on that.
So the messenger RNA vaccines, that technology has been around for about 30 years. It's been studied in other viruses, and it's been very effective. And what it does is it helps to form antibodies to fight the virus. That's typically what these vaccines do. The adeno viral vectors like Janssen, it does the same thing, but in a different way. And that technology's been around since the 1960s. So this isn't new technology, but it's just a new virus that we're dealing with.
Why are there 2 doses for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and only 1 for the Johnson & Johnson?
That's just the way they were manufactured by the companies. Pfizer are 2 doses given 28 days apart, and the Moderna is 2 doses given 21 days, and the Janssen is just 1 dose. And that's just the technology that's involved.
I want to make a quick editor's note here. Deborah incorrectly stated the duration between the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine doses. Pfizer doses are separated by 21 days, while Moderna doses are 28 days.
We need to take a quick break from this conversation. While you're waiting, this is the perfect time to follow Diamond on social media. You can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And if you're local to our Indiana, Pennsylvania headquarters, you might like to follow our Facebook and Instagram pages for our Diamond Drugs and Medical Supply stores. We welcome your likes, shares, retweets, and comments on all platforms. And now, back to the show.
We know that everyone over 12 years of age is now encouraged to get the vaccine. Is there anyone who should not receive the vaccines?
So it used to be that if you were 16 and older, you could get the Pfizer vaccine, and 18 and older, you could get the Moderna and the Janssen vaccine. But then back in May, Pfizer went for approval for the 12 to 15 years of age group, and they did get that approval. We suspect that Moderna will do the same thing, and probably Janssen down the road. The only people that should not receive the vaccine is if you've had an allergic reaction to the first dose of one of the vaccines, you should not get the second dose. Or if you've had an anaphylactic reaction to another vaccine somewhere in your life, or an anaphylactic reaction to an injectable medication, such as the IV or the IM or the sub-Q route.
Talking about getting approval for younger people to get the vaccine, what about children under 12? When do you think they will be able to receive this vaccine?
So Pfizer is studying, they've enrolled 2 years of age to 11 in another study to see what the efficacy would be of the vaccine and what would be the dose for that age group. Right now, it's the same dose for 12 and older. So we'll see if the dose might change for the younger group.
You just talked about allergic reactions. Aside from that, what are the other risks of receiving the vaccine, and how serious can these risks be?
So the risks are typically the adverse reactions that might occur. I like to call them the immunologic response that you have after you get the vaccine. So there are 2 categories of reactions or responses. They are localized, and then there are systemic. The localized reactions are the ones where your arm is sore after you get the vaccine, or there's redness or there's swelling. And really that only lasts for a short period of time, and perhaps use an ice pack or use some over-the-counter preparations such as ibuprofen or acetaminophen. The systemic reactions, again, they come upon you pretty quickly and they end quickly too. So it's like you flip a switch and they're gone. So it's just your body responding to that vaccine, and everyone responds differently. So how I respond might be different from how you respond, but that's okay. And that's a typical response. So some of those systemic responses would be just an all-over feeling of malaise or myalgia, like your muscles hurt or you have a headache, things like that. And again, most over-the-counter preparations is really all you need.
I want to ask, with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, there was a period where there was a suspension, if that's the correct term. What exactly happened with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? And of course, it's safe, but just to, again, allay concerns that people might have.
So there were reports of a syndrome called TTS, which is thrombotic thrombocytopenia syndrome. And it was occurring in 18 to 36 years of age females primarily. And there was really no predisposing factor that was the same with the group that did experience this TTS. But it was enough to make the FDA and the CDC put a pause on that vaccine. For the 2-week pause, the CDC's FASCP committee, which is the Advisory Committee of Immunization Practices, they gathered all the data, and they found that there were 28 cases out of 8.7 million Janssen doses that were given that this syndrome seemed to have occurred. So they did add that to the EUA fact sheet. And, pretty much what they said was, here's the fact sheet. The process worked the way it was supposed to. People did report the adverse effect. And maybe females between that age group would choose another vaccine. And we're now at the point of vaccines for COVID-19 disease that you do have a choice on which vaccine to get. So, we would like to think that if you're in that age group and you're female and you're the least bit hesitant, then choose Moderna or choose Pfizer, but just get the vaccine.
I want to conclude that section on a positive note. What are, of course, the primary benefits? We talked about risks, but ultimately we want to be talking about benefits to people who are on the fence.
The benefits are that it will keep you from getting sick if you get the vaccine. It will keep you from going into the hospital. It will keep you from being put on a mechanical ventilation. It will keep you from dying. So those are the benefits of getting the vaccine. And the other thing, Adam, is that if you do contract the COVID-19 disease and you recover from it, whether it be a mild to moderate case, somewhere down the line, you could also experience what we call the long haul effects of COVID. And those can be anywhere from brain fog to mood disorder, depression, cardiac arrhythmias, acute kidney injury. Just about every organ in your body can be affected by COVID disease. So that's another major reason why you would want to get the vaccine.
Do you encounter patients who have had COVID-19 and then use that as their reason to not want to get the vaccine? Oh, well, I've built up the antibodies or whatever. I've certainly heard people in the community saying that then decide not to get the vaccine. Is that something you encounter?
Oh, yes, all the time. And what I would like to say about that, once you have COVID disease, you do have antibodies. That's true. But we call some of those antibodies irrelevant antibodies. So the only way you'll know that you have the antibodies that you need is by getting the vaccine, because that is a specific dose that has been tested in over so many thousands of people and millions of people at this point. So that's why you need to get the vaccine, even if you had COVID disease.
Thanks for listening to PodcastRx from Diamond Pharmacy Services. If you're a fan of the show and have any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, or if you have any thoughts on a particular episode you'd like to share, please email us at podcastrx@diamondpharmacy.com. And while you're at it, please rate and review our show wherever you get your podcasts. Your feedback helps us make the best show possible for you. And as always, we appreciate your feedback and support. Now back to the show.
We're back on PodcastRx with Deborah Milito doing a COVID vaccine Q&A. Now, this question here is really just ties into something you just said, and it's a question that people do have. Will these vaccines give me the actual COVID-19 disease?
No, they won't, because they're not live vaccines. So that would be an impossibility.
Is it possible to get the virus after vaccination, to be reinfected?
Yes, it is. And we have to keep in mind that when we get a 2-dose vaccine, it's 2 weeks after the second dose when it becomes most effective. So I think some people are under the impression that after you get the first dose of Pfizer or the first dose of Moderna, you're kind of good to go, and you're not. You need to get the second dose, and you need to wait 2 weeks after that. For the Janssen dose, you need to wait 2 weeks after that dose to have it be most effective.
Is it possible to still spread COVID-19 even if you are fully vaccinated?
Yes, it is possible.
So that, again, underscores the importance of continuing to socially distance around unvaccinated people and wear masks and all the other mitigation measures. Can someone receive the COVID vaccine with other vaccines? Is there any issue there?
Well, this is some new information recently came to light. When these vaccines first became available, the CDC said to not give any other immunizations within 14 days of receiving the COVID vaccine. And the reason they did that was out of an abundance of caution so that they could determine if people were going to react differently to the COVID-19 vaccine as compared to other vaccines. And what they found over the last several months, almost a year for some people, is that people didn't react any differently to the COVID-19 vaccine as they did other vaccines. So now you can give more than the COVID vaccine on the same day, but you need to give it in a different anatomical location. So for instance, you can give the COVID vaccine in your left arm, and you could give the pneumococcal vaccine in your right arm. Or if we're talking about teenagers, we could give them the HPV vaccine in one arm and the COVID-19 vaccine in the other arm. So that's really good news, because what happened to a lot of us is that in the year 2020, we didn't go to our doctor's appointments in person. We did a lot of telehealth. And so you can't give vaccines via telehealth. So a lot of people did not get their preventative vaccines. And so now we're playing catch up. So if you're coming to get your COVID vaccine, let's get you caught up with your other vaccines at the same time.
What about women who are pregnant or breastfeeding? What is the latest guidance on vaccination with them?
It is recommended by the obstetricians and gynecologists that you do receive the vaccine, much like the flu vaccine. Those people that are pregnant that do develop COVID-19 disease tend to have more complications, and we want to try to prevent that from occurring. So it is recommended to get the vaccine. But I would say that if you have any hesitancy about that, that should become a shared clinical decision with you and your provider.
Another concern that floats around is about the cost of the vaccine. Now, I know most sites that I've seen or entities that are giving out the vaccine make it clear that it's free, but is this something, is the a free COVID-19 vaccine going to last for the foreseeable future? Or is there a moment where people do have to be concerned if they weren't able to get it now, they have to pay for it?
It is a free vaccine, which is unheard of. But it is, and it's because the government paid for it. They paid the drug companies to get it to us. I think that model could change in the future, maybe when it becomes fully authorized by the FDA, but we're going to wait and see how that plays out.
So, Dr. Milito, what do I need to do with my vaccination card now that I have it? There's different, this is more in the political arena, there's debates over vaccine passports and things like that. Do I have to flash it when I go into the store? You know, like the guys in Wayne's World flashing their backstage passes. You know, now that I have that vaccination card, what really should I be doing with it?
So that vaccination card will get you into some places, but it's not mandated by the federal government or anything like that. But like cruise lines, they just had a cruise take off today that launched, and that you did have to show your immunization card to be able to be on that cruise, and you had to have a PCR COVID test to say, you know, you were negative. But what I would say is take a picture of your card and keep it with you that way. I wouldn't laminate your card just yet, because you might have to get a booster somewhere down the road, especially our seniors might have to get one. So I'm cautioning people to not laminate it, but to take a picture of it and make sure you know where like it's in a safe place.
With that, you just led right into my next question. How likely will booster shots for COVID vaccine be necessary going forward?
We're not sure about that. I feel like I've never said I'm not sure or I don't know in the last year as many times as I've done of late.
Fair enough.
It's such a dynamic process with this COVID disease and the vaccine. But I think that there probably will be a booster, but for certain age groups.
Will it be at all similar to like seasonal influenza vaccinations?
It might be.
Herd immunity is one of those concepts that is thrown around, and I think certainly there's a fair amount of misunderstanding about this topic. So, Dr. Milito, if you could, what is herd immunity, and how close are we to reaching it with the current vaccination rates?
So, herd immunity is something that we've been trying to achieve from the beginning of this COVID disease. And we do need to reach about 80% for us to really say we have herd immunity, which would protect those people that didn't get their vaccine. So we're kind of doing some of their work for them by getting our vaccine. But we really need as many people as possible over the age of 12 to get their vaccine. And that whole age group of 12 to 17 years old would be very timely with school starting in the fall. So we would really like to see a push to get that group of people immunized to help us to get to herd immunity.
Absolutely. Another thing that causes concern are the different variants of COVID-19 disease out there. These vaccines that we have now, how likely are they to protect against these variants?
So far, so good. And until that changes, then the vaccine will stay as it is. But it might be that, we have to have a booster to cover variants that aren't being covered by the vaccine. But right now, everything is fine the way that it is.
Wanted to touch on something aside from vaccination. What therapeutics are available or possibly in development that will treat COVID-19?
So around Christmas of 2020, there was a class of medications that became available called monoclonal antibodies. And it wasn't talked about that much, but now it is being talked about that it really is a therapeutic medication that can be given to people that have mild to moderate COVID-19 disease. So to be able to qualify for a monoclonal antibody, you would have to test positive for COVID and not be oxygen dependent. And there's some other comorbidities, but those two things are very important, and not be in the hospital. So this would be like the group of people that live in a congregate setting, like a long-term care facility or assisted living. And you would be given these monoclonal antibodies that stop the spread of the virus. It shuts it down, is what it does. And if you catch it within 10 days of a positive test, it's very effective. So there are a couple different monoclonal antibodies that are available. And one is called bamlanivimab that you give in combination with etesevimab. And then the second combination is casirivimab and indevimab. And all of those are given as an IV infusion. So they're given in the nursing home or the assisted living facility. And it's been very, very effective. So we just want to make sure that everyone knows about the availability of those monoclonal antibodies, also known as MABs, and that we have them at Diamond to send out if there's an order.
I did want to ask before we conclude here, how have these last few months been with the Strike Force immunization team? How have those efforts been going in general?
So we formed a team here called the Strike Force Immunizers, and we're a group of pharmacists and nurses that can go out to our facilities and actually administer the vaccine. I have to say that it was an extraordinary process to get that off the ground. And as the vaccine coordinator, I'm so proud of our team on what they were able to do. And I am part of that team, and it is one of the most rewarding things that I've done in my career of pharmacy.
Yeah. Well, we certainly appreciate all the work you're doing, Dr. Milito, and the rest of your team. And thank you so much for stopping by to answer these questions that no doubt you've answered a million times based on how, without any notes whatsoever, you were just able to answer them, go right off for several minutes at a time. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise in all seriousness, and I'm sure we'll be having you back on again very soon. So thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast features conversations with healthcare professionals. Their statements and opinions discussed herein are for informational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered professional medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for the advice of an appropriately qualified and licensed healthcare professional. Therefore, listeners must not rely on the statements made herein.
PodcastRx is a production of Diamond Pharmacy Services, the nation's largest correctional pharmacy provider. Catch our new episodes on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please rate the show and leave us a review. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear about on the show, or you'd like to share your thoughts on an episode, you can email us at podcastrx@diamondpharmacy.com.